Cari Rinker. I'm back again with Ruth Wyman, who is a judicial candidate here in Champaign County. Some of you submitted questions. I'm going to go through a few with Ruth. Ruth, why don't you remind everybody the position that you're running for and your website for those that are interested in finding out more about you?
Sure. I'm running for the resident circuit judge seat vacated by the retirement of Michael Q. Jones here in Champaign County. It's a circuit judge position, but only voted on by the voters in Champaign County. And people can go to my website at www.wyman4, as in the number, circuitjudge.org. You can also look at my website from my office, www.ruthwymanlaw.com.
All right. Our first question comes from Matthew. He asks, Ruth, when did you first decide that you wanted to run for judge?
You know, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but certainly when Judge Jones announced that he was retiring, I thought, well, I think I'd like to be a judge. I had thought about and certainly applied for other judgeships as they had opened, but it seemed to make sense. I knew it would be a year for a Democrat, or a better chance for a Democrat because it's a presidential year. So in Champaign County, Democrats tend to do better in presidential elections. And it was just a Champaign County or a resident seat. So I also thought that would be a lot easier to do than doing all 6 counties in the circuit.
So Catherine asks, and she's from Urbana, she'd like to know, why do you want to be a judge? From what I understand, you're already making a big difference in the community in your position as an attorney.
Well, I think you can make a big difference in the community no matter what your profession or where you volunteer your time. And so it's nice that people think and believe that I make a difference as an attorney. I think as a judge, I can also make a difference and make sure that people not only are treated fairly, but that they feel like they're being treated fairly, like their voice is being heard, and I feel like I can do that.
So what do you anticipate would be the biggest differences in your impact in the community if you were going to be on the bench versus your role as an attorney?
Well, as an attorney, you really have a role as an advocate and really trying to advocate your client's position. Mm-hmm. As a judge, you don't advocate either position. You impart the law or follow the law that is already set in place by the legislature or by higher courts, the appellate court or the Supreme Court. And so it's a different role, but really making sure that those who don't have a voice still can be heard, whether or not they have an attorney or not.
So Mike asks, what have been some of your toughest moments as an attorney? And what do you anticipate are going to be the toughest moments for you if you're on the bench?
Well, as an attorney, some of the toughest moments have been when the client doesn't get what they think they should get, and frankly, they don't get what I told them I thought they should get under the law. Oftentimes the client says, well, I want this, and I say, well, that's great. That's not what the law really will provide. So we can ask for that from the judge. We can ask for that from the other side. But I don't anticipate getting it if the judge follows or the other side follows these arguments and agrees. Sometimes we're lucky and we'll get that, or the other side will agree, even though the law really wouldn't really provide that if it went in front of a judge, but we could try that. The toughest parts with going in front of a judge as an attorney are when you really believe that under this law and under interpreting the statute, this is really what should happen, and they clearly don't agree. Mm-hmm. And so that's tough. It's also been really tough when a client has testified or responded in a way that I understand and that makes sense to me. Perhaps they're very upset. Perhaps they're angry. And knowing them, knowing what they've gone through, knowing the stresses they have, their response is completely appropriate. Someone not understanding their background, what they've gone through, the judge may see that as really inappropriate action and then hold that against them in the decision. So that's difficult as an attorney and trying to help the client. And I try to warn the clients about this and that they need to be aware of these issues and how the judge may perceive them, even if that's not how they intend to be perceived. Now, the other part is, as a judge, I think the toughest part is really going to be where I want to be sympathetic to a client, to one of the attorney's clients, or I may know the attorney and know, well, this is what they're trying to do, but they're not following the rules of evidence, they're not following the statutes, they're not following the case law, and in many cases I can't just say, did you mean to say this? Did you mean to cite this? you can't really give them a lot of hints. You got to follow the law, even when their position is much more sympathetic. And so I think that'll be tough, but I think that's just what you got to do.
Got it. So the next question is mine. So Ruth, as you know, I'm a big fan of alternative dispute resolution. I'm a trained mediator. I even teach mediation here at the University of Illinois Law School. And so how do you see the interplay between alternative dispute resolution, such as mediation and arbitration, with the court system?
Well, I think it's a good idea to try to do mediation. With some clients, with cases when they are able to be mediated, you could save thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars instead of continuing to go back to court on this issue or that issue. And so I think it can be very helpful. I think if one person of the two sides or one side of the two sides doesn't want to be reasonable, then really what you're doing when the court says you have to go to mediation is just check mark, you did it, but there's not a requirement that you be reasonable. Of course, what's reasonable is dependent on what side you're on and where you think it should be reasonable. You may hate this person and think this person was terrible, and so what would be fair is that you get all the time with the child and they get nothing. Well, that's not what the law says, and so it's not likely what a judge would do. And so while it can be helpful, there's also times, I suppose, like in every situation, where someone can take advantage of the situation. And so if someone doesn't want to agree to something, they're not going to agree. You're not going to have an issue mediated successfully. But I tell clients, if you're interested in really reaching an agreement and the judge and the other side is interested in reaching an agreement, sometimes you have a mediator who say, well, generally this is what this judge does, or this is what the law will provide for. And so if the clients really trust you or believe when you say this is what this judge will do or this is what the law will provide, as in parenting time, for example, you have much more, I think, a higher likelihood that mediation will be a success. However, when you have one person who has a lot of money or parents who have a lot of money who can throw that money into an attorney and the other side who doesn't have a lot of money, then just like in any case, you're not as likely to be successful because one person may just take advantage and say, I don't care if we don't reach an agreement in mediation. I've got $10,000, $20,000 to throw into this case. Mm-hmm. And that's what they do. And so it can be successful, and it's wonderful when the parties reach an agreement. But, as in many, many different types of cases, there are the exceptions.
Yeah. So an analogy that I give a lot to people when I speak on this topic is that when two businesses go to war in the courtroom, they almost never can do business with each other afterwards. So sometimes I wonder when two parents go to war in the courtroom, whether or not they're able to co-parent afterwards. I guess my question for you, Ruth, is that do you think that our court system promotes acrimony between parents, or do you think there's things that we could do to help promote the co-parenting between two people?
Well, Champaign County has adopted limited guardian ad litem, so different from the guardian ad litem status that many other courts have in family law. And I think that's a good idea to see if you can get a case settled, because an outside attorney who's not paid to be involved in the case, who really doesn't have anything to fight for, just to simply evaluate the case and make a recommendation. I think that's a good step. Mm-hmm. If it can sort of explain to the parties, look, this parent has been the one that's more involved, this parent is the one who has more free time, all of those sorts of factors that the court's going to look at and can say, I would recommend this. I think the court would recommend and would adopt this because this is how this judge works and this is how the statutes work. And so that's helpful. I do think that once you go to a full-blown trial, it's really hard to trust and to reach an agreement later on major mm-hmm. issues with family, on family law issues, certainly, because you don't trust. So you think that, they're just saying this because they're going to use it against me. And I see that in cases, and it's too bad. But oftentimes, as long as you're honest and as long as you share the information, I tell the client, that's all you need to do. And if they say, I'm not going to answer you because I think you're going to use it against me, well, if you don't answer it, I certainly will use it against me. So how about you answer, and how about we try and work this out?
Right. That's a good point. So the next question is from Diane. She lives in Muhammad, and she says, people sometimes complain about how backlogged the courts are. Is that true, and why is that?
I certainly have some theories about why it's backlogged, and in many cases it is. I tell clients, the courts don't move at the speed of life, and so we just can't do that. These are the realities, and these are ways we can try and work around it. In Champaign County, family law custody cases are backlogged about 9 months. And so, people who have the primary temporary custody don't mind generally to allow the cases to continue out and continue out and continue out, because that gives them more time as a primary custodian, probably more child support, and then they also are able to get the time to be able to establish, oh, look, the child is used to living with me, and so when it comes to permanent custody, well, gosh, they've already been living with that parent for at least 9 months. So then you have attorneys who'll take advantage of it, and there's others where, gosh, you're close to the trial time. Oh, well, let's try and reach an agreement. So you say, Judge, we don't need a court time because we're going to try and reach an agreement. Now, there's nothing that stopped them from trying to reach an agreement a month before or 2 months before, but then you often then get a delay as well. Now, whether that delay is because the parties really were trying or as just a tactic, it depends on one's perspective. In Vermilion County, the delays are only 1 or 2 months. Coles County, same or maybe even less. So Champaign is certainly much more populated than Coles County, Vermilion County, Ford County. But Champaign County does have a terrible backlog. They've got 2 judges who are primarily do family law cases. Springfield, I think, has 3, and so I think a similar situation or similar population, and they get through cases more often. There have been attempts to try and get a 3rd judge who's dedicated just to family law, or at least part-time to family law. So far, that hasn't gone anywhere in Champaign County, but certainly there's hope springs eternal on that issue.
So has it gotten worse over time, or has it been that way here in this locality? And by the way, this is not unique to Champaign-Urbana. I practiced in New York City for over 7 years, and there were similar backlog problems there, and I've heard in other geographic areas. Has this gotten worse, or has it always been this way?
I think it's gotten a little worse. I'm sure it goes up and down, and there are different strategies that the judges try to employ from time to time to try and reduce that load. In McLean County, what I've noticed is that they do an in-person pretrial I think it's a month before or 2 weeks before the scheduled trial date. In a family law case, you have to exchange your exhibits ahead of time. You have to provide notice to the other side if you object to any of those exhibits and on what grounds, foundation or relevance.
Do you like that? I think I would, actually.
I like the idea. It forces you to get ready early. So I do think that that's helpful. And then you see, ooh, yeah, we don't have the documents for this, or we need to get this, and ooh, maybe our case isn't as strong as we thought it was, because here's this, and look what they've got. So I think it's a good thing to do. What you end up seeing when you don't have something like that is the last minute rush the night before with trial and with exhibits, which is part of what some attorneys will do or feel like they're forced to do because they've got other cases they're working on. But then that attorney and certainly that client don't have as much time to go through all the exhibits and say, well, what would we do with this exhibit that came from the other side? So I think the more time that you're required to sort of prepare in advance and give documents to the other side, the more likely you are to either settle or for the case to go faster, because you're not searching for documents. You've got your trial notebook because you've already exchanged those.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. What are some things that you foresee if you're on the bench that you would do to just help with the backlog issue?
Well, certainly, if I'm not busy on another court or don't have anything scheduled, I wouldn't mind doing the family law, orders of protection, those sorts of things. I know when Judge Rosenbaum has a busy Tuesday, Thursday call, he'll let us know. I've asked and emailed out to other judges to see if they have time. Some do, some don't. Sometimes there are extra judges, sometimes there aren't. But I think unless I'm in court, and scheduled to be in court that afternoon, I would just be ready and try to make myself available. 8:30 to 4:30 or 8:30 to noon and 1 to 4:30 should be for hearing the cases. And then afterwards and on weekends would then be for making decisions and making rulings and updating research and that sort of thing.
So one of the many differences for me after moving from New York City was in New York, if you have a divorce or family law matter, as an attorney, your client has to be there. you could literally be sanctioned by the judge if your client isn't there. I was never sanctioned. I did get yelled at a few times if my client wasn't there, but that's not the case here in Illinois. Do you think that by requiring clients to come to court that would help the backlog at all or make a difference?
Yeah, I wonder it might. In criminal cases in Champaign County and almost in all the other counties except Macon County, where Decatur is, in criminal cases, the clients always have to show up. Pre-trial, even though it's saying, Judge, we're asking for continuance, the clients always have to show up. In Macon County, they don't have to show up. And in fact, it was in front of one of the now appellate court judges who I was in front of for a criminal trial in Macon County, where I was like, wow, that's great. My client doesn't even have to show up. When it's a pretrial and it's just a scheduling thing, I think that makes sense to do things that way, where you don't have to.
Exactly.
But in family law cases, sometimes it's scheduling. It might help speed things along because the clients then are there. Now, a lot of clients hate going to court, or they've got family obligations or work obligations. And so if you keep having them come off every month, then I think that could cause problems for some of the people who have to go to court or some of those clients. On the other hand, they're more invested and aware of what's going on because they see, their attorney saying, oh yeah, we'll just continue it out another month. Oh yeah, we'll just continue it out. And maybe it's better for the client to see that and say, well, no, it wasn't the other side's fault. I saw you asking or agreeing to continuance. What are we doing? I want this over with now.
Right. Interesting. So, Amber asks that some judges have a reputation for yelling. How do you foresee your demeanor on the bench?
I expect and hope that my demeanor is calm and understanding and attentive. And certainly if I know that clients are very tense, often in court. It's the rest of their lives, whether they'll get to spend time with their family and how much. In family law cases, whether they'll be sent to prison for 5 years, 60 years, or anywhere in between, or whether they'll get just to have probation, or whether they'll be let off or whether they'll be found not guilty in criminal cases. These are huge things and cases that impact people for the rest of their lives. So I expect clients to be very emotional. And I think that when clients are surrounded by people who are yelling, that's more likely that they'll be sort of not able to control themselves as much as they might prefer or wish they had. So I hope that I am sort of present a calm demeanor for clients, and that if an attorney thinks that I haven't, or one of their clients thinks that I haven't, that they feel comfortable enough either telling me or telling someone to tell me, so that I don't do that. There was actually a time when I was on the Urbana City Council, there was a woman who was talking in public comment, and there was a man on the city council who kept asking questions that appeared very personal to me, almost like he was hitting on her, and then asked for her private phone number. And I thought, this is inappropriate. And so I was laughing at this city council member because of the questions he was asking and how inappropriate it was and how it seemed so obvious to me. But a week or two later, she wrote a letter to the editor saying how rude I was for laughing at her. And I thought, oh dear, she thought I was laughing at her. I was laughing at this city council member who was hitting on her on public television. So I wrote her an apology letter, and explained that I had no intention of laughing at her, and I apologized and tried to explain. But it made me remember, and it sort of has reminded me that just because you're reacting to something you observe doesn't mean that everyone around you is observing the same thing or has the same thoughts.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Well, so going back to yelling, I have a small story that the very first court appearance I ever did was in small claims court in Brooklyn, which is in night court, by the way, in New York City. And it was Judge Judy style. I definitely got yelled at. So why do you think some judges have that demeanor on the bench?
I assume it's a personality that they have, not just on the bench, but anywhere, or maybe they just feel like they've been disrespected, and it's important to make sure that's true. I remind my daughter when people and other people that when people react in a certain way, when they're yelling or when they're mad at you or when they're frowning, it's likely more a reflection of how they feel at the time, what happened to them well before they even came in the courtroom, or whether well before they had that interaction, they're not feeling well or good about something that happened, either to them or that they did, and now they're projecting it on the other person. Mm-hmm. And so I try to remind clients, and frankly my daughter, that this is not, that it's not necessarily something you did. It's something that they've interpreted or something that happened to them before that they're now reacting to.
So Ray from St. Joe, he asked, what could be done to improve the judicial system in Champaign County?
I don't have all the answers. I have some ideas. So I like this idea of exchanging exhibits or potential exhibits in advance. I think that's good. I like the idea of mediation very quickly. The limited guardian ad litem issue is good, although when you have clients who are so poor, you're doing the case pro bono, and they can't afford, right now it's a $450 limited guardian ad litem fee for each side, then sometimes you just have to go without that and then hope that you're able to either resolve the case or just go through it. It's harder when you have clients, one side who is unrepresented because they don't know what the rules of law are, and a judge can't give them legal advice. And so that causes some continuances. It causes additional time where frankly, when I've represented a client and the other side is unrepresented, part of me just wants to reach out and say, here's the things you need to say, or Judge, I think what he's trying to say is he loves the child too, and he spent time with the child, but of course I can't do that to represent the other side while I'm representing my client. In family law and in civil cases, judges can ask questions, and you see that sometimes with the unrepresented parties, the judge will ask questions. But I do think some more pretrial discovery disclosures might help, and then getting the judges who don't have a full docket to take over some of these really full dockets, orders of protections, family law issues especially.
So along those lines, if you are appointed to the bench, what type of cases would you be handling?
Well, if I'm elected to the bench, I don't know for sure. It's the chief judge, I believe, who makes the appointments for each of the circuit judges. And then I think it's the circuit judges who decide what the associate judges do. It's the circuit judges who appoint the associates who serve it on 2-year terms and then can be reappointed, and generally are. It's right now it's Jason Baum, who is the current circuit judge for the resident seat. He handles a lot of contract disputes, so I might be appointed there. Judge DeFanis is also vacating. He does criminal felony call. So I would be willing to do any of those, but frankly, wherever I'm needed. And so if the judge says, we need a part-time family law judge, I'd be fine with that. Frankly, I'll serve wherever it would help ease the burden as far as the delays and any problems that people feel exist in the courts in making sure that cases are heard and resolved.
Can you talk a little bit more about how judges rotate here in Champaign County? I know in our first video, you mentioned that you really look up to Judge Holloman, and I've had some probates with her, and I presently had past tense an adverse possession case with her, and now Judge Olmsted has taken over this case, and she indicated that she's rotating out. So how does that work exactly?
Right. Well, I believe it's the chief judge who'll make that decision and can control sort of the calendars for the associate judges. Right now, the chief judge is Judge DeFanis for Champaign County, so he decides sort of when associates are switched out. And I think that generally the circuit judges stay in that position until perhaps everyone changes or there's a new judge elected, and then maybe it goes in a pecking order of how long you've been there. So with Judge Holloman is now in traffic court. Judge Dill, I think Olmsted is in small claims. So it does switch out. In Vermilion County, they switch, I believe, every year. Coles County is either every year or every 2 years. And this is the first time I've seen associates changed in Champaign County, actually.
So what are the advantages and disadvantages of rotating judges?
So the advantage of the rotating judges is no judge gets sort of stuck in their way. And it forces them to really learn the different areas or keep updated on the different areas of law. And so I think that's good. And that sort of, if one judge, maybe one sees as a curmudgeon or only really ruling on a certain way, ruling on cases, having a rotation, okay, well, so at least next year you'll do, if you're taking on these types of cases, this will be this way, or it won't be a certain way because it'll be a different judge. That might be an advantage. There's certainly an advantage to having a non-rotation schedule, or generally non-rotating, where the judge really learns the law, for years and years and years, and can build upon that knowledge. So I think, both ways have their advantages and disadvantages.
Got it. So the next question is from Will. He wants to know more about your diverse practice areas. Which have been your favorite and why?
I really like landlord-tenant, but part of it's because I feel like I really have a deeper knowledge of that from my past work at the tenant union, working and being on the Urbana City Council, being familiar with and helping to craft modifications to the Urbana Human Rights Ordinance.
The tenant side or the landlord side?
Generally I do tenant side, although once in a while, if I have a current client in a different type of case and they are a landlord, then I'll represent that landlord. But normally it's representing the tenants, and taking care of the case, that way on behalf of the tenants. So there's specialized law, there's Urbana Landlord Tenant Ordinance, there's the Urbana Human Rights Ordinance, there's the Champaign Human Rights Ordinance, there's building codes. And so those are sort of different issues than I think most people are used to having. So I really like those, although those are usually cases for which I'm not paid. When I represent the tenants, I'll take them on pro bono or ask that they pay $50 a month or something like that if they're able to pay. But I find those just more interesting. I guess I also feel like I can make a bigger difference that way.
Got it. So Miranda from Bonneville, she'd like to know what has been the biggest challenge for running for judge?
I think being able to dedicate the time to getting out, getting to meet people, going to events, and also continuing the practice of law and having the time for that.
All right. So I tell people all the time that I feel like local elected officials can affect our everyday lives much more so than the presidential race can. Do you agree with that statement?
Oh, definitely. I saw that in when I served on the Urbana City Council. I mean, we'd make rules with regard to parking fees and parking fines, and whether a car could be booted if they owed a certain amount of parking tickets. And then the local human rights laws are certainly important. The local landlord tenant ordinance, the building codes, those are all very important and not really affected by federal law at all. So I think it is important, and then you do the same thing with judges. I mean, you don't go straight to the Supreme Court when you've got a divorce. In fact, generally you can't go to the Supreme Court on a divorce case because it's a family law case, and the U.S. Constitution decides what cases can be heard in federal court. So most of the cases that anyone would have go through the state courts, trial court, then up to the Court of Appeals, or the appellate court, and then only if the Illinois Supreme Court thinks it's a very important issue will the Illinois Supreme Court even accept any of the cases from the appellate court. Appellate court you have an automatic right to, although they generally give discretion to the trial court judge's decision. With the Illinois Supreme Court you have only about less than 5% of the cases from the appellate court that the Illinois Supreme Court will even take. And it's certainly much less by the U.S. Supreme Court. So
I was an election poll worker in New York City, and actually during the last presidential election year. And it was just really fascinating to me to see the voter turnout at the primary level and then with local races. Why do you think so few people care or they want to or get involved or become knowledgeable about local candidates?
Well, part of it is I think the media has a tendency to just cover the bigger candidates or the bigger issues. And so then people follow that. I think that some of the local candidates don't have the money to get out to do the TV ads and those sorts of things. And so they may be known by their friends, but then you've got to go out door to door and that takes time on top of family obligations and work obligations. So it's harder to get the word out, and especially if the media, which is so much owned by the large conglomerates, if they're not focusing, because that's not who pays the bills, they're not focusing on the local candidates, then the people don't generally know.
So along those same lines about impacting the local community, how do you foresee just judges on the bench in general impacting the community for people that are never entering the courthouse at all?
Well, I think it's important because you never know if you're not going to, whether you will enter the courthouse at some point in your life. If, someone serves you with if your spouse serves you with divorce papers, if you have a child in common and then there's allocation, what used to be called custody papers, served with a summons to appear in court for jury duty, served as a subpoena to appear in court because they believe you're a witness. And so judges can affect people. Certainly they affect so many people in society who then will affect others, whether it's a custody case and then which parent is going to raise the child more, and so then how that child is raised. And then frankly the sentencing orders as well. There's so much discretion for a judge in criminal cases if there's a conviction on what the sentence is. And even prior to that, on the bail, on the bond that a defendant has when they are presumed to be innocent, but still the state is requesting that there be a bail bond, how much money that is, and if it's something that an individual can afford or not. And then the other issue is we spend about $25,000 per person to incarcerate someone. And so that's a lot of your taxes that are going just to the county or to the state to put someone in jail when they haven't been convicted, when all they've been is accused. And so the judge decides whether they have to stay in jail or how much they have to pay. For someone who's making minimum wage and the judge puts $100,000 or $250,000 bond, wow, they're not getting out, they're staying in there. And I've had clients with substantial bonds set by the judges who stay in jail for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, because they're waiting for their trial and they can't afford the $250,000 or $100,000 bond, because they just don't have the income. Former Vietnam veterans or some people who have volunteered and done tours in Afghanistan being accused of these crimes and but being told that they have to pay all this money. They don't have it. Sometimes they switch attorneys and that delays things more, but we're paying for housing that. And so each individual, whether they go into the courthouse or not, is certainly affected by the judge's decisions.
Got it. Next question is from Josh. He says that he's a farmer. And he'd like to know, what do you think your biggest strengths or qualifications are to become a circuit judge? Well,
I think the biggest one is that because of the general practice that I have, I'm familiar with all areas of the law that a circuit judge presides over. So there are some people who have done for the last 10 or 15 years all criminal law, or have done divorces for perhaps the lowest income individuals or that sort of thing. My practice has allowed me to represent people in all areas and from all income levels. People who can't even afford $100 or $200 to people who have millions of dollars. And so it's allowed me to sort of understand the community, especially the lower income community, but also the areas of law, all areas of law that a circuit judge presides over.
So Tina in Urbana, she's interested in any endorsements that you've had. Have you had any endorsements?
Sure. Well, I have a list of endorsements on my website of individuals in the community who have endorsed me. But just this past week, I was endorsed by the Illinois National Organization for Women, the PAC. And so it's really nice to receive that. And I've done a lot of work on behalf of women, from being president of the local chapter and an officer in the state chapter, but also just representing a lot of victims who need orders of protection. So domestic violence victims, I get referrals from Courage Connection or others who say she really needs help, and can you represent her even though she can't pay or can only pay a little bit? I'm happy to do that when those are referrals. I've gotten referrals from other individuals who just say that my friend needs this help and they can't afford it. And so I often represent people simply because though they can't afford it. I've also done appellate work, and in fact, when I was representing a gentleman in Coles County who had been emotionally abused by his ex-wife for so many years, the judge there denied the order of protection for my client and his wife. And we took it up on appeal, and I got a unanimous decision from the appellate court overturning the Coles County judge. And so that was nice to feel sort of vindicated in that case. I've also represented people on, on both sides of issues, including orders of protection. So people who have been accused of domestic violence. And I talk with the client. I say, if this is true, we can't be doing this. You can't do this anymore. Can we settle? What do we need to do? Sometimes I feel like the allegations, don't meet the Domestic Violence Act definitions, and will argue it. Sometimes we're victorious, sometimes we're not. But I like to think that's also helped me with and representing victims or people on both sides of cases, those accused and those who are victims, to be able to understand all sides of an issue, and that's really what a judge needs to do as well.
So I have a small team that definitely helps me here at Rinker Law, and I can't imagine that you are doing this campaign all by yourself. Tell us about what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, I have several interns and a campaign manager who's a good friend of mine, and that's actually really helped. Even though it's a lot of work, they really make it fun. And so they've designed a lot of activities. So in addition to going door to door, gathering signatures, those sorts of things, we've had various events. We had a coffee at Cari last Saturday, which was a lot of fun. And I got to meet several people, and people who I wouldn't have otherwise met, I think, but for that event. We've got coffees coming up, some more in December, and then throughout January, February, and in March as well. We have a big Raise the Ruth party just down the street at the Surface 51 building on December 6th. From 4 to 6, so that should be a lot of fun as well.
So I've been seeing your beautiful signs all over town. By the way, I'm a little jealous of your sign, your brand. It looks great, very attractive to the eye. So do you know all these people that have signs up?
No. I guess I don't. There are a lot of people I know from the community who have contacted me or said, put up a sign, that'd be great. But there are a lot of people who took signs, like when we were at the farmer's market and at the Democrats booth. I don't know them. But I certainly appreciate that they've taken signs and they're showing their support for me. It could be that I know them. Maybe I represented them. Maybe I represented one of their best friends, or a family member. But I can't say that I know all the people who have the signs in their yard.
So I have a confession. I don't really have a history of doing pro bono work. But you have inspired me to start doing a little bit. In fact, I just emailed Judge Rosenbaum about going, adding onto the list here. So what inspired you to do pro bono work in the first place?
Well, I think it's from what I had seen when I worked at the Champaign-Urbana Tenant Union. So many individuals who were being taken advantage of by their landlords. And it was clear that if the tenant union wasn't able to help, there was nowhere they could go, because the issue wasn't an issue that could be covered or represented by Land of Lincoln Legal Assistance Foundation, which has funds to represent in certain areas. But, for example, if you're just being discriminated against, if you are not getting your security deposit back from the landlord, certain issues like that, they can't represent you. And but they do a lot of representing tenants who are being evicted. And so it was really that inspired me to frankly go to law school, because I didn't like the fact that just because they were poor, they couldn't defend themselves. Or they couldn't defend themselves as well as they wanted to. And so going to law school, becoming a lawyer was part of what I wanted to do, so I could do the pro bono work and march into court. And when a landlord told a tenant, oh, I'm going to do this anyway, even when the tenant union or the tenant said, well, you can't do that, that's against the law, and the landlord says, well, I'm going to do it anyway, that I wanted to be able to be there to say, not so fast. So obviously that's branched out into other areas of law, but that was sort of the impetus of just seeing how people with money were taking advantage of people without money, even when the people with money clearly knew that they didn't have permission to do that.
So if you're appointed to the bench or elected to the bench, what do you think that you could do to help promote pro bono work in our legal community? Well,
there's websites. There's actually a lot of ideas to do that. Part is, I think, when there are attorneys representing clients pro bono, you can call their cases first. Certainly recognizing pro bono work being done by attorneys, celebrating them. And I think those are some of those ideas that you can do. And certainly if there are other ideas, I'd want to follow those and support those, just so that people understood that. I wonder if there's a way to gather more donations to allow those to occur as well.
So that's all the questions I have for today, and we've got a couple more video interviews scheduled. So I'd encourage our listeners to please send myself or Ruth emails directly. You can email me, Cari, Cari, at rinkerlaw.com. Ruth, what's your contact information?
Mine is Ruth at ruthwymanlaw.com.
And again, your website?
For the campaign is www.wyman, the number 4, circuitjudge.org.
And you've got a great active Facebook page, so definitely check that out. Thanks again, and talk to you later.